Good evening. The Community Commission on Police Oversight meeting for August 7th, 2023 will come to order. My name is Mary Dito Swinton, the chair. Welcome to everyone who's joined us this evening in person and via live stream. This meeting is public and subject to Minnesota open meeting law. To facilitate record keeping, I'd like to ask at first that if you have a question, commissioners, or comment, if you would please turn your mic on, and there's a little person-shaped thing, and it'll turn green, and you'll know that your mic is on. And when you finish speaking, if you could turn it off so that we don't have any hot mic situations, I think we would all appreciate that as well. And also, final request, when you do speak, if you could say your name before your question or comment, just for record keeping, I'd appreciate that as well. And at this time, will the roll please be called so we can verify a quorum for the meeting?
Yes. So Chair Dito Swinton,
Present.
Vice Chair Reeves, Commissioner Awid, Commissioner Clement,
Present.
Commissioner Gurin Sherman, Commissioner Lohr, Commissioner Newman, Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Peterson, Commissioner Shanfield, Commissioner Smith,
Present.
Commissioner Sturm, Commissioner Verpaal, Commissioner Welly, Commissioner William Johnson.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you. We have 13 commissioners present. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda? So moved. Is there a second?
Second. Smith.
Thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner Reeves, I believe. I wasn't looking up. Thank you. To adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Gurin Sherman.
Thank you. We discussed this before the meeting, Madam Chair. There is a discrepancy between the agenda that went out to the public and the one that's presented tonight. It's pretty minimal, but I just think in general we want to make sure that the agendas are together. I don't know if two different staff or two different are putting them out, but
Yes.
For the next meeting I would like to see that.
Thank you, and I thank you for calling my attention to it. I didn't realize it. So just for clarity's sake, the agenda that we will follow tonight is the one that is online, so that if you got your agenda online and those people watching via live stream, the order is roll call, adoption of the agenda, acceptance of minutes, introduction of Office of Police Conduct Review staff, review of meeting norms. Then we'll have our guest speakers from Global Rights for Women. We'll have our guest speaker, Chief Brian O'Hara. That's item 7. Item 8 will be a guest speaker, Joel Fussy, Assistant City Attorney. And item 9 is chair report. Item 10, new business. Item 11, public comment, and then adjournment. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yes, I had a couple other points. Again, we discussed this before the meeting, excuse me, but just for the record, your excellent written chair report contains a lot of information about committees, and my understanding is that when we get to the chair's report, we'll be able to have discussion about the committees.
That is correct,
Thank
as
you.
it's written in the report.
I would like to make a motion to move public comment to the top of the agenda.
Commissioner Gurin Sherman, if I may, the commission made this decision already that we were not going to do that.
That
So is
doesn't-
there some information that's new that we should consider for this motion?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't have to have a new reason. I can have a motion, and it can be not seconded, it can be failed, and I can still bring it up. I mean,
But it's really not prudent to keep addressing things that the commission has already decided on.
I think it's prudent because the public has been saying that they want the public comment at the beginning. And in answer to your question, is there anything different? We're in an anomalous situation where members of the public do not have any access to each commissioner. So we have an issue about where public comment should be, and yet the public can't comment on it
And we
before.
will be addressing the issue that you brought up about access to commissioners as well.
I don't think it's per our norms to interrupt me. I think I have a right to say why I want to put this on the agenda, and I think I have a right to move the motion
Okay.
that the public comment be at the top of the agenda for the reason that the public right now has no ability to contact any member of the commission. There's no official emails. There's no other way for the public to comment on the agenda before it is enacted. And that seems anomalous to the promise of meaningful engagement, which is right on the CCPO website. So for those reasons, I'm making a motion again to put the public comment at the beginning of the agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, I'd make an alternative motion.
At this time, we've got one motion on the floor already, so we'll just,
Well, that motion has been not seconded, so
it
it's
has been
defeated.
seconded.
Oh, I'm
Commissioner
sorry.
Lohr seconded.
I apologize. I didn't hear that.
Is there any additional discussion? Oh, yes, Commissioner Reeves, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Reeves. You might need to move closer to the mic.
I can yell. Can y'all hear me if I talk loud? So we've had this discussion before regarding moving public comment to the beginning of the meeting. I would like to make sure that the public that comes to the meeting can accurately address the things that were on the agenda. And so I would like to keep it at the end of the meeting. I know that the chair has some additional comments about emails and communication with the commissioners, but I would like to keep that in the meeting. Thank you.
Is there any additional discussion? Commissioner Lohr.
I'd just like to state that my support of the motion is due to the fact that in our previous meeting, the public pointed out that some of the people they wished to hear the public comments were no longer in the meetings by the end of the meeting, and by keeping it at the end of the meeting, some of those comments are missed by the relevant authorities, and so that is why I would support the move to the beginning of the meeting.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to move public comment to the beginning of the meeting, please raise your hands. That's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. You may lower your hands. All those opposed to the motion to move public comment to the beginning of the meeting. And I vote no. It is a tie, and I'm not certain what to do when there is a tie. The motion, it doesn't pass because you need a majority vote. I don't know why I said that. The motion fails. Thank you, commissioners. Commissioner Gurian Sherman.
Thank you. I'd make an alternative motion that we move to consider placing public comment at the beginning of each meeting based on the number of people who have signed up. So could we, for the sake of discussion, can the staff tell us how many people have signed up for public comment?
I believe the sign-in sheet is in the back of the room. Thank you.
I'm sorry,
She said there are 5 people signed up.
5. So that's a total of 10 minutes. So I'm making a motion that we consider where public comment should be placed based on the number of people who sign up for public comment. We're talking about 5 people and 10 minutes. And it seems to me if we're going to have meaningful engagement with the public, we don't have anything else yet set up for that, that we should consider at the beginning of each meeting where public comment should be based on the number of people who have signed up. So that is my motion. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Point of clarification?
Yes.
With that motion, is there a cutoff point? What number are you suggesting would influence that placement?
It,
Oh,
Thank you. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties I'm having. I don't think that, I think for me, 5 people in 10 minutes is kind of a baseline, but I wouldn't set one like that. I think if there's a particular meeting that might call for no public comment at the beginning, we could consider
I'm going to
that.
interrupt. I think your mic has gone back off. See if the one to your left is better.
The green light's not going on. Okay, gotcha. So in answer to your question, Commissioner Laura, I don't think there's a baseline. In general, I think, though, that 10 minutes at the beginning of a meeting for 5 people gets to your comment about making sure all 5 of those people are able to stay. I think that we kind of look and take the pulse at each meeting, and that's what my motion would go to. There really is no baseline.
Can I also ask a point of clarification? So what if someone comes to the meeting late, they can't get here, it's 6 o'clock? Are they not allowed to speak if we have 5, because one public comment section, so if we have 5 speakers that show up at 6 o'clock, and then 5 more show up at 7 o'clock, because that's when they can get here for work, are they not allowed to, per this motion, speak?
I think it's up to us. We can have a bifurcated public comment. We could have a public comment at the beginning for the people who are here and ready to speak, and we could also allow for a public comment also at the end of the meeting. The motion allows for that kind of flexibility.
If I might comment, my concern here is the same as before. If we don't know how many people from the public show up, we invite people to come and speak to us and we give them a time. You know, it's a 5 or 10 minute window of when they will speak. We're not able to do that anymore if we don't know how long we're going to be allowing for public comment at the beginning, which is why I have advocated for it being at the end. Right now, there's no speaker here to hear their comments, and that was a concern. And so I struggle with how to manage time with such a great unknown. Is there any other comment? And I apologize for stepping out of my chairman impartial role, but I just wanted to, that's a great concern for me. But is there any other comment? Commissioner Newman.
Yes, Melissa Newman here. I would like to say that I would like to keep the public comment at the end, as of how you stated as well, because we can stay on the topic of discussion based off of the agenda of the day and not have the agenda be incorrect as far as how everything's floating around. I think that this is beginning to be a huge distraction of the focus of what it needs to be on a daily, on a meeting basis. You know, public, and I thought there was supposed to be a generalized email to where the public would have an opportunity to email questions ahead of time or concerns ahead of time based off of what the agenda that was posted. I would like to see that to come into, frustration, but in order for that be an open space for those that are not able to come, so to the meeting or is coming late. I mean, all of our time is valuable, but I cannot focus this particular meeting based off of public comment, and I feel like having this communication every single meeting that we have and these motions set for public comment is a huge distraction away. We've already spent almost 20 minutes on this topic alone. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? Commissioner Awed? Oh. Well, thank you for that point. There is no second on this motion that we are discussing in violation. And hearing no second, the motion fails. So thank you so much. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Commissioner Gurry and Sherman.
I would like to see added to the agenda a discussion about trainings. It's old business. It should have been on the agenda. I brought it up at the last meeting. I asked if it would be on the agenda this time so we could get a schedule. It's not on the agenda. And I have a further motion to discuss what Commissioner Newman just referenced, which was we had a motion to, at the last meeting that passed, requesting the staff to come back with alternatives for communications. We have not adopted a system where there will be just one person, the chair or the vice chair or both, getting communications and filtering them. We have not passed that. We passed a motion to receive options. I asked again, would that be on the agenda, and was told it would be. So there are two motions I have on the table. One is for trainings to be added to the agenda, a discussion on that, and a discussion on the communications.
Thank you. So let's take them one at a time. We're adding there's a motion to add to this agenda?
Yes.
To add trainings to this agenda. Is there a second?
Wasn't the motion to approve the agenda moved and seconded? So that's what we need to vote on.
Yes, thank you. I love that y'all are reminding me of stuff I already know. Thank you. Is there any discussion about the motion that's on the floor to approve the agenda?
If a motion is put on the table to move the agenda and approve it, then there is no ability to amend it. So I think that this is a purposeful way of keeping topics that we are not coming to conclusion on off the agenda.
Commissioner Gary and Sherman, so are you saying you would like to amend your motion to say that it is an amendment to the motion that's already on the floor?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. So is there a second to Commissioner Gary and Sherman's amendment to the motion to add trainings to this agenda?
Clarification question, what about trainings exactly? Trainings is a big topic. Do you mean training community trainings? Do you mean trainings for us as commissioners? Is there something personally you don't feel trained enough on and you personally need more training on? To volunteer training for all of us is hard. So just clarification on your motion, please.
I think it's an excellent question. We have two questions. Which trainings in particular? I think the training on police. I'm sorry. The first question you had is which particular trainings? One is police use of force, and also the equity and inclusion and racial diversity training. Those are two trainings that are on the list of 8 trainings that are in the ordinance. We haven't received those trainings. We haven't received some of those other trainings. And when you say, do I personally feel unprepared to go into the panels or to go into the committees? No, I don't, but I know that this is a brand-new commission with every single person here new, and I feel the trainings were really a big topic of discussion for the City Council. They said that they should be done in an annual session, so my feeling is we should have had them all in a session. They are requiring it. I'm not making the rules here. The ordinance says that. So I feel that if we're going to be in panels together and we're going to be on committees together, we should all be on the same page with at least the mandatory trainings that the staff, that the city council has passed. I welcome the trainings that we're getting today. Domestic violence is huge, but it doesn't substitute for the trainings that are required by the ordinance.
Thank you.
If I may ask another clarifying question, I was not present at the last meeting. I was absent. Have we yet been asked to be on panels?
Not as yet.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a second for this motion? Hearing, I'm sorry, Commissioner, you didn't have, okay. Is there a second for this motion to amend the motion to approve the agenda by adding training to it? Hearing no second, the motion falls to the floor. And we're back to the original motion to approve the agenda as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, please raise your hands. $12 in favor. You may lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. And that's 1. Thank you, Commissioners. The motion to adopt the agenda is approved. And I'm gonna, again, you may have a copy that has a little bit different order, but I'm gonna go by the order of the agenda that is online. So item number 3 on that agenda is acceptance of minutes from the July 10th CCPO meeting. Yes.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes of the July 10th meeting, noting there are 2 typos that I can forward to the staff.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Smith to approve the agenda with the correction of typos, which he will email. You can send them to me and I'll send them, which he will email. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hands. You may lower your hands. Any opposed? Thank you. The motion is adopted. All righty. Next on the agenda is introduction of the Office of Police Conduct Review staff. And I would ask staff as well to please speak into the microphone, tell us your name, your job title, and a very, very brief description of what it is that you do for us.
Good evening. John Jefferson. I'm Director of the Office of Police Conduct Review. Basically, pretty much I'm helping with the CCPO, organizing the CCPO and supporting the CCPO, especially with the training and also the research.
Hi, everyone. I think we met at one of the initial meetings. I'm Britta Momani. I'm currently the case manager for the Office of Police Conduct Review. Nice to see you all again.
Hi, Lisa Hill. I'm the intake manager.
Hi, Shanice Swides. I'm program assistant, and I'll be clerking for the CCPO meetings.
Christopher Band, legal analyst, working with data requests and research and study.
Anyone else, any other staff here is welcome to introduce yourselves. I think we would love to hear from you.
Hello, everyone. I am Alberta Gillespie, and I'm the Civil Rights Director. Nice to see you all this evening. And I'm going to pass it to this lady. Let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Anderson, City Attorney. Hello, Commissioners. Joel Fussy with the City Attorney's Office as well. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Number 5 on the agenda, yes, Commissioner Gary and Sherman.
Did we hear from all people in the back? Did everybody introduce themselves?
I don't believe everyone back there is staff.
I would, if you're here representing the city as staff, I would like to have you introduce yourself, please.
I don't think everyone back there is staff.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the review of meeting norms, and you should all see a copy sitting somewhere where you can see it. I was going to say in your eyesight, but that didn't make sense. Meeting materials will be shared on time. Suggested agenda items will be shared in advance of the meetings. We're going to read and share materials prior to the meeting. We're going to participate in discussion, ask questions for understanding, implement time limits on presentations, discussions, etc., respect the opinions of other commissioners, abide by the decisions of the commission, avoid personal comments, speak one at a time, and when recognized, be concise and notify the chair when a meeting or training absence is necessary. And I just realized number 8 should just be commission and not commissions. So I will fix that for next time. But those are just some norms that we agreed upon during our July 10th meeting. And they were included on the chair report, and it's just, the purpose of these is just to help commissioners maintain a productive and respectful meeting environment, and we are keeping these at the forefront of our proceedings so that we can do the work that this commission was established to do in a way that respects the resources expended through each commissioner's time and talent, as well as the city and the wards that we represent. Next on our agenda is an institutional analysis of the Minneapolis police response to domestic violence. And our guest speakers are Cheryl Thomas, founder and executive director of Global Rights for Women, Rhonda Martinson, JD, a consultant for Global Rights for Women, and Ms. Coon, this is 2? She's not here? Just 2. Okay, thank you. Please welcome our guests. Thank you.
Is that better? Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for having us here this evening to present our report, an institutional analysis of the Minneapolis police response to domestic violence. My name is Cheryl Thomas, and as your colleague said, I'm the Executive Director of Global Rights for Women. And my colleague here, Rhonda Martinson, is a consultant with our organization and did really the lion's share of research on this report. So I'm hoping that we can present the report's findings and recommendations to you this evening. Rhonda will join in with me as I ask and as she sees fit. And then we would like to leave some time for questions.
My apologies. I meant to ask you if you would let our guests get through their presentation and then ask your questions or make your comments at the end. So I apologize for interrupting you.
And can we count on you to be our generous timekeeper? Sure. Okay.
And is there a way to make that?
Got it handled right here. Oh, thank you. Okay, we're all set. Thank you again so much. So let me just begin by telling you a little bit about Global Rights for Women. We're a nonprofit entity here, based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our mission is to work with partners around the world on legal and systemic reform on gender-based violence. Mostly our partners around the world, it's really interesting actually, when they seek our help on drafting new laws, amending laws, and working on strategies to enforce those laws, the first topic they always focus on is domestic violence. Domestic violence is the most common form of gender-based violence that we know in the world today. That's what the statistics that we have at least show. The United Nations has called this a pandemic, possibly the greatest human rights violation of our time. Every country where the issue has been studied has devastating rates of violence against intimate partners. And that's primarily what we're focused on here. So I'm going to just go to the next slide here to show you a little bit about why we undertook this study here in Minneapolis. So much of our work is global, but here in Minneapolis in 2017, this office came out with a report on domestic violence and the police response to that. Are any of you familiar with that report? Were any of you here at that time in 2017? Okay, nice to know that, thank you. In that report was an outline of how the police responded to this crime. And what we saw was the 2014 to 2016, the 43,000 domestic violence related calls, the MPD responded in a way that included police reports or making, I'm gonna just bring this up here, or making arrests in only 20% of the cases. So that's far below the national average. And in fact, when I saw that statistic, I was alarmed because in so many of the developing countries that we work in, that the police response is either similar or even better than the statistic that we saw in that 2017 report. So after that report came out, we contacted members of the Offices of Police Conduct Review and decided that we really needed to focus on the Minneapolis police response to domestic violence right here in Minneapolis and figure out what was happening. What was happening when victims and survivors called the police? What were they doing? Was there a policy in place? Was it being followed? Was it a matter of lack of resources, any of those things? And we undertook this study really as a follow-up to that 2017 report. We know from our work around the world, I've been doing this work for 30 years around the world. Global Rights for Women has been doing it for about 9, that in order to have a good quality, and that means really prioritizing victim safety and offender accountability, a good response by the police to domestic violence is that you really need to do this continued, ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the police response to domestic violence. And you need to do that. This is what we talk to our partners about all around the world, police officers, advocates. It doesn't happen just once. You can't just do revise a training, revise a policy, and sit back and know that that will be implemented effectively. It really requires this ongoing monitoring. That is the nature of our report. It's a monitoring report. It's a deep dive into, as I said, what's happening when survivors of domestic violence call the police. So in this institutional assessment, and I'll tell you who was involved in that in just a minute, we did really 3 dive text analysis. So we reviewed 911 calls, we reviewed police reports, we did a review of police policy, supervisory materials, and then we did interviews. We did interviews with focus groups of victims. We did interviews with, I think, over 30 stakeholders, so those people in the system, police officers themselves, managers, supervisors, and we did interviews with the service providers in our community. So we know, some of you may know Domestic Abuse Project, Cornerstone. These are shelters, people that provide direct services on the front lines to victims of domestic violence. Yeah, go ahead, pop up.
Something else you'd probably like to know, my name is Rhonda Martinson again, by the way, is that we looked at police reports that were randomly selected. In other words, we didn't sort of look at certain shifts or look at certain people, because the idea of institutional analysis is not to look for someone to point fingers at. We assume that people that are doing work in public service, such as police and prosecutors, chose that for their career as a reason, but we look instead at what people do or don't have available to them to make the kind of decisions that we would like to see that keep victims safer and hold offenders accountable. So in addition to looking at randomly pulled reports, we looked at them across all the shifts that officers work in Minneapolis. We looked at them across all the precincts that are worked. The people that we interviewed were from a variety of neighborhoods, races, ethnicities, first language English or not. We looked at also people that, 911 call records in the same way, pulling from all those different areas. So just want you to be aware that there is quite a variety of experience that we covered, as well as quite a variety of work experience of the people that we reviewed.
Thank you, Rhonda. And then this next slide shows the working group. Who was this working group? The institutional analysis methodology comes from inside, so it's not so often in our work. We do human rights reports around the world where we're not working inside, for example, with the police and prosecutors. We're interviewing others. We may interview the people themselves, the stakeholders themselves in the legal system, but the reports, the human rights reports, really are an outsider report, a report of civil society, just commenting on how a institution is managing or adhering to its obligations in international law, that's to treaty obligations. So this report is different. In this report, we selected a group of people that were really major stakeholders in the issues we were addressing. Our staff, of course, the police commander and lieutenants in the domestic violence unit. We had a judge on our working group who's had a lot of experience in thinking about the judicial response and how that ties in to police and prosecutors to domestic violence. We had a probation officer on our team. We had the service providers that I mentioned before, Domestic Abuse Project, Cornerstone, and Tubman. Yeah, major service providers that do serve so many victims right here in our city. And then we had the city attorney and the county attorney representatives also. So we met every month for over 2 years and talked about what we were finding. Once we got done with our review of those 200 police reports and 911 calls, we talked about them with the working group. People in the inside who care about this issue and want to make sure that the police are responding in a way that prioritizes victim safety and offender accountability. We found 7 gaps we call them gaps, in the police response to domestic violence. They're serious gaps. We have talked with the chief about these gaps. We have talked with others in the community about these gaps. We look forward to working with our institutions to address these gaps. And I'm just going to go through them very briefly right now, and then also answer your questions if you have them tonight. They're in the report outlined extensively. The report itself is about 140 pages. There's also an executive summary that gives you these 7 gaps in a kind of good short outline way. And I want to actually start with the gone on arrivals. it's a very dangerous situation for women, survivors of gender-based violence, mostly of whom are women, when abusers flee the scene before the officers are there. We call those gone on arrivals. And in our findings, what we learned was that police officers very commonly did not attempt to locate that abuser, somebody who may have been actually a felony level criminal. That was one of the hallmarks of our findings, was this gone on arrival. So many of these abusers, when the police would be called, either by the survivor or the neighbor, the person would not be there. And then they wouldn't attempt to locate them, leaving the victims vulnerable to the future violence. That's a serious issue. If the abusers violated no contact orders, now we can have a no contact order issued by a judge in civil court. We can also have DANCOs, they call them, domestic abuse no contact orders, that are issued as part of a criminal case. Those were all lumped together in this finding, that they just, when those orders were violated, let's say a victim had an order for protection from the civil court, and the abuser violated it, and the officer came to the scene, they were not charged as they should be with a criminal offense. Now, it could be a misdemeanor if that abuser had violated several times that no contact order. That could rise to the level of a felony offenses. So we're talking about serious level crimes here often in our report. When responding officers communicated with survivors in ways that exhibited explicit or implicit bias, this was one of the things that the survivors talked to us about a lot. It discourages survivors from coming back. Okay, I've got my time here. How about 1 minute? I didn't get a 1 minute warning. Okay, thank you. I'll just let you go ahead and read the rest of those gaps, and then we'll turn to the recommendations. Questions? Can I address any questions about this report? Do you know where to find it? Do you have the executive summary? Would you like to know our plans for the future? Any of those things? Yes.
Thank you. I'm Stacy Gurian Sherman. It's a remarkable report. I didn't get a chance to read the 140 or 50-page report, but I did read the executive summary. It's remarkable. Your work is really valuable. Appreciate it. I think it would be very helpful for us as commissioners on the Community Commission on Police Oversight to get both of your takeaways or feedback on what is it from the report that we should take into our work when we're doing disciplinary or misconduct panels, when police have been accused of that. And secondly, we have a big purview. We have certain powers that can go through committees, and we can collect data. Certainly the 7 gaps are something that we can use in our committee work, but how is it that your work informs our work as we go about reviewing police misconduct and disciplinary allegations?
Thank you for that question, and I'll say one thing, and then I'm going to let Rhonda talk, because I've done all the talking so far. But I hope these gaps and our recommendations are an alert for you. These are the problems that when we talk to our survivors, this is what they said to us. I'll never forget one of the quotes of one of the survivors. "I have the right to call the police. I have the right to call the police, and I have the right to an effective response." And that's, when you're thinking about what happened in your cases, I would keep that in mind. Rhonda, you want to go ahead?
I think what informs, or potentially informs the work that you have to do is something that I said in a meeting with the city attorney as well as the chief of police, as we didn't plan to have this report come out right in between the human rights report and the DOJ report. But now I'm kind of glad that it did happen that way, because as I've read all those reports together, there's a lot of similarity and overlaps between them, especially in the areas of things like discipline, supervision, and training. So that makes me feel that there is a real kind of we got it right sort of message amongst all of these reports, all the reports and people that did them did similar activities like interviewing people, doing ride-alongs, and came up with some of the same concerns that we had about supervision. So you can read the report and find many stories from women's experiences with police that were not good. I'll just say that. But I think one of the differences in this kind of work is we also talk to the police. And one of the really valuable pieces of information we got was an evaluation that police patrol officers had an opportunity to respond to about the last domestic violence training they had, which was 2018. That's the last time that they had received that training. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've done probably 75 projects like this across the country. And I'm used to the kind of snotty remarks that police officers make about training. They get kind of grumpy about all the training they have to go to. No offense taken, just the way that I'm used to hearing communications. These evaluations were not like that. I didn't see any remarks like that. 73 officers responded, and I would say many remarks were almost wistful about the lack of training that they received. Many called out for more supervision, more mentoring and coaching in cases that had to do with domestic violence. So people like Cheryl and I that do reports like this and do projects like this, we are often in the well-balanced or the balancing act position of wearing two hats. We really want to be the voice of victims who are having these experiences in your community, but we also don't want to assume that every police officer is a jerk, and we want to ask the experiences that they're having with these kinds of cases too, and I think you'll find that in this report. But good question, because I think that is what you can find here is a lot of, I think, desire from officers themselves to receive the kind of supervision and training that you were talking about.
So I just want to say thank you for this report. What I found fascinating is the 7 gaps, but in my day-to-day and kind of talking with officers, what is interesting is the lack of training when it comes down to when there's actually a victim at a residence and the person is there. I've had interactions where they left the person there, the abuser there on a Danko, and when I've called and asked, the response was, oh, we didn't know, and I've asked the lieutenant. That's not what our training told us. And I said, well, we need new training because that is not appropriate to leave the person who has a Danko against them sitting there with the victim and you drive away. And so I think this highlights the main thing about training. And if they're asking for more training, we need to take that. I hope that the chief and people hear that because that was inappropriate. And lieutenants obviously need new training because they didn't know either. They actually had to go ask someone else, how is this supposed to happen? And that was the lieutenant speaking to me. So I think this is very important information, so thank you.
Thank you. And I would just wanted to say one thing in response to that too. It's so critical that the officers that are responding to domestic violence and sexual assault also have this training. The cases are so nuanced. They're so different from stranger assaults. These people are intertwined, have children together often. Our economic dependents are often part of this. A police officer just can't respond effectively without this knowledge of the dynamics of this violence and training to do it. And I will say one other quick thing in response to your comment, and that is the landscape is changing all the time. Years ago, we didn't know that when a man put his hands around the neck of a woman and pressed, how dangerous that was. It was a misdemeanor. We gradually learned how dangerous that was. Police all over the world now receive training on strangulation, how dangerous it is, what happens, and it's a felony now in Minnesota. And because we monitored and learned more about that, we made it a felony. That's what has to constantly happen in these cases, is that police need to be aware of these new developments. We know now what happens. For example, there was an article in the paper today of the most recent domestic violence homicide in Minnesota was a 77-year-old woman who had her head slammed into the concrete by her husband. This is I see the look of horror. It's very common for victims of domestic violence to have their heads slammed into walls and floors, or beaten with objects. You look horrified, but this is something that domestic violence survivors deal with all the time. We know now from our research on football players how damaging that is, what lasting, horrific, deadly possible consequences. So when a police officer comes into a scene of domestic violence here in Minneapolis, they should be understanding if there's been a head injury. There's now services for head injuries and people that know about what the consequences are in our community here, in our health provider community. Yes.
Thank you so much for this report. I'm wondering what kind of response you've had from institutional leadership so far, and if your work group is going to continue to meet or monitor the response.
Yes, we do plan on that. We are a nonprofit agency, so we will have to find funding for that. We spent many days, hours, weeks on this report. So we do plan on that. We're grateful that Chief O'Hara met with us before. My sense was that there's definitely some interest in making this police response better. We're also in contact, we've been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office all year, providing them with the drafts of our report. We were very disappointed that gender-based violence wasn't included in the DOJ's report, but we are very committed to continuing to make sure that these changes are made so that mostly women in this community are not being injured at the rate they are with no effective police response.
We've also met with the county attorney, city attorneys and her staff, county attorney and her staff, Family Violence Council, president of the city council here in Minneapolis. And we will be also having a meeting with the Domestic Violence Steering Council. And I would say, without exception, each of the people that we've met with so far have thoroughly read the report, thought it was a good report. Again, noticed the overlap between, in general, between like the supervision and training issues and the DOJ and Human Rights report, and have made a commitment to working with us in whatever way is possible in the future to implement some of the recommendations that we made.
Just one last thing too, thanks, Rhonda. I was absolutely thrilled, I want to say to Chief O'Hara, to learn that there were 2 new supervisor or deputy chiefs being added. I think that report was in the paper this week. So I think that will give us more access, I hope, to the MPD and be able to work in more detail with them. Yeah. I think our time's up. Thank you so much.
If I could just very briefly ask a question about one of your gaps that you had on your slide up here was about explicit or implicit bias. One of the trainings that we're supposed to undergo as commissioners on this commission is on race, equity, inclusion, and belonging, anti-racist training. How important do you think it is for us as commissioners to have that training?
I think it's deeply important, and I'm glad to know that.
Yeah, I think that you should be having the same training that the officers do that you were providing oversight for. And one of the things that I think officers are tired of is it's not helpful just to put somebody up here like me and blab about a PowerPoint for 30 minutes and sit down. A training should be, as you're even planning, it should involve the very diverse community that we have here in Minneapolis. Many people experienced bias that I think was very difficult, or they perceived that they were being responded to in a biased way, in a way that was very difficult for them to articulate it. Not necessarily the kind of TV-style racist remark, nothing like that, but just being treated rudely, impatiently sometimes, being treated with perhaps, you got to live this way, in this neighborhood. And so I think one of the things that our report points to pretty well as the DOJ and Human Rights report, it's not enough to just say I'm doing a training on implicit or explicit bias, bam, here's a PowerPoint for 30 minutes. You've got to have a multidisciplinary audience so people can react in the way that they would at work. How do you make the violence visible to the next person who has to take an action on it? Oftentimes we train in silos, and you don't get to interact with prosecutors and other providers. So again, a really good question, and I would say it's important for you to have the same training that you expect officers to.
If I could ask, I'm really trying to keep us to this, but to our time that I've devoted to each of our guests. What I will ask is, if you have a question for them, if you could email it to me, and I will group all the questions that I receive and send to them, and I'll share the answers with everybody. Is that okay? Just so we can stay on track here. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you again to our guests from Global Rights for Women for taking this time. Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate the work that you're doing to make our communities safer.
Good timekeeping, too.
Oh, thank you. And on the timekeeping, but thank you. Item 7 on our agenda is a look at the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the City of Minneapolis settlement agreement and order with our guest, Minneapolis Police Department Chief Brian O'Hara. And I'd like, again, for us to let him get through his presentation and save questions for him until the end. Thank you, Chief O'Hara. You can pick a mic.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank Latanya for is on? I want to thank Latanya for the conversation we had. That it was her idea to bring me here, and Director Jefferson and everyone for having me tonight. It's great just to have an opportunity to actually get a chance to meet everyone on the commission for the first time, so thank you for having me. We talked in general just about the MDHR settlement agreement and potentially what might be coming to the city under a federal consent decree. So I'm sure everyone is aware of, in general, the main topics that are covered under the settlement agreement. And I think I just wanted to provide a brief overview of how the police department is being structured to implement those changes and to achieve compliance with those changes, and how we interface with other city departments while doing so. Myself personally, if anyone doesn't know, I've been the police chief here for the last 8 months. I come from Newark, New Jersey, where I oversaw a federal consent decree there for about 5 years. So I'm familiar with the reform process, and I'm familiar with conducting reforms in a climate while we're experiencing significant challenges around crime and violence. Today, actually, been working on a number of changes to the structure of the department to address a lot of the issues that you just heard, but also to structure the department to be prepared for implementation and compliance with court-mandated reforms, but also to have greater accountability around our crime-fighting efforts and around earning trust with members of our community. So for the last several months, that's been a process. The state of Minnesota actually had a state law that limited the command structure that could be in place in the Minneapolis Police Department. It was specific just to Minneapolis. So thanks to the help of Senator Latz and our IGR folks here in city government, we were able to change the state law. I presented a couple months ago a table of organization to the municipal council that was initially approved, I believe in February. And this past week, I was able to get the final approvals that I needed, both to ratify the change in state law and also to add 2 additional deputy chiefs to the Minneapolis Police Department. So effective actually tomorrow, the Minneapolis Police Department will be divided in 2 divisions, similar to how the fire department in Minneapolis is. There'll be an assistant chief that oversees our operations and an assistant chief that oversees our community trust building and engagement activities. Below that, on the operational side, there'll be a deputy chief overseeing patrol and a deputy chief over investigations. And then on the community trust side, there'll be a deputy chief just for internal affairs. There'll be a deputy chief just for constitutional policing, which will oversee the court-mandated reforms, and then a deputy chief over professional standards, which currently exists here as a bureau and includes things like training and other administrative functions. I felt these changes were necessary just to bring us in line with what similarly situated cities who are under court-mandated reforms have, but more importantly, to structure the department not just to meet the bureaucracy and how things have always been done here, but to show structure and accountability over what we believe is actually most important, right? So if we think, you know, earning trust is just as important as crime-fighting operations, that should be reflected on the table of organization. If you look at any table of organization, you will see what is actually important. So if we have a person high level on the executive just dealing with internal affairs, and if we create a new internal affairs bureau, which is what we're in the process of doing, that has not just internal complaints, but also conducts a section for candidate investigations and a section for use of force investigations, that shows how seriously we take those issues. Similarly with constitutional policing, we're creating an entire implementation unit. There's currently a commander that's overseeing that implementation unit, Yolanda Wilkes. We're in the process of hiring civilian staff and reassigning sworn staff to assist those efforts. But again, if that's something that we believe is so important, it should be on the level of a deputy chief overseeing just those operations. So that's why I think it's so important. And I think we need to ensure that we have the same level of urgency and the same level of accountability both over both the core functions of our agency, which is to have fewer victims of crime and violence, but to be doing so in a way that earns trust with members of our community. So I think honestly, I think it's really that simple, and that's why the department has been restructured that way. And I think it's coming at a perfect time because 15th, I believe, is next week. We'll be beginning our public community engagement sessions under the MDHR agreement, which is something that is something similar to something that I did previously in my previous role in Newark. And it's something that I think is absolutely necessary in Minneapolis, regardless of any, you know, MDHR agreement, consent decree, what have you. The reality is, I believe, the reality is in this city, over the last 3 years, so many of our residents and so many of our police officers have been absolutely traumatized by everything that has happened. I believe that we have very open, gaping wounds, and that we have not done anywhere near enough that we need to do to try and come together and see each other and try and start healing. So I believe today that at least internally in the department, I made very significant appointments and transfers of people today, and I know that sends a very strong message internally to what I believe is important. And I believe that will help me move the department forward in the direction that people want to go. At the same time, going forward and beginning next week with these community engagement sessions, I think is absolutely necessary for people to try and hear. Again, I think the one thing that has not happened is we have not heard each other. There has not been a forum for people to come together, express their frustrations. And I know that is not something we can do in a day or even in a dozen sessions. That's going to be something that we're going to have to do over and over and over again. And people who are frustrated with us, rightfully so, will need to see that we will keep coming back, and that we are sincere and genuine, and we want our residents' input in what the policies and practices of the police department will be going forward. That is the whole purpose of doing those meetings under the legal agreement, but I think it is absolutely necessary if we're going to start coming together for people to start seeing one another. The one thing that's obvious to me that doesn't seem to get mentioned is it can seem at times, especially I think from the perspective of a lot of our officers, I think we have lost so many members of this department that I think a lot of our officers have felt like they have been painted with a broad brush. that they have been judged by people who do not know them personally. And they have been judged despite the fact that these are the people who have remained and in the vast majority of the cases are very, very dedicated to trying to figure out how we get things right. I think in some ways there have been incentives at times for people to leave over the last 3 years. So I think, I don't think we give enough credit to the members who do remain. And I think the thing that's obvious to me that so many of our cops have, that they share with our residents, that just people have not seen, is this common trauma that people have experienced. I think if we begin to have conversations and we begin to engage in a meaningful way, and people can hear from the perspectives of our police officers and what they have been through, and cops can hear from the perspectives of residents and what they have experienced, I think that has potential for us to really try and begin to have progress and move forward together. So that's just kind of I don't want to talk forever. I want to talk about whatever you all want to talk about, but that's kind of how I see the MDHR agreement and reform in general. Community engagement is a real part of it, and I think my perspective, the measure of success is not going to be do we have a legal argument before a court to say we did this, we did that. My perspective, the measure of success in this city will be people will feel safer, and more people will say, I trust Minneapolis police officers. I've had more positive experiences with Minneapolis police officers. I know the cop in my community, in my neighborhood, and I know that he has our residents' backs. Like that is the real goal. This is not, to me, this is not a, kind of an academic exercise. This is actually about making change real for people. But it is something, absolutely, that's going to take us some time. But I think with the structure and beginning the engagement sessions that we have coming up, I think we have a real opportunity to show the rest of the world that Minneapolis can get this right. So, thank you.
Are you ready for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Reeves.
I'm sorry, turn it off.
Okay, let's try that. So thank you for coming. My question is, with the challenging hires that happened at MPD, how does your new structure that you implemented today address that? Obviously, there's an issue with how information is coming up to you with background checks and the like, and just very challenging hires. And so with this new structure, can you speak to what this will do in terms of building that community trust when we're looking at who actually makes it up to being hired here? Thank you.
Thank you, LaTanya. No, we've spoken at length about this personally. As an outsider, it's different for me. So I can come into this organization because I haven't been here for the last 23 years, and I can see things immediately that I recognize we need to change that. And that's something that's positive, and that's a strength for me because I can observe things that happen in the street that might be normal for the way business happens here, but I know we need to change it because it either communicates indifference at times to our residents or maybe even disrespect. So it is definitely a strength for me to be an outsider, to see things that have been, if you will, normal or typical here, and to know we need to change that, because I do believe strongly that if we are changing the culture here, we need to be changing the little things to make it easier for us to change some of the bigger issues that we have. At the same time, it is a weakness because things that I would expect to be happening aren't necessarily happening. And as an outsider coming in, I am not in every single precinct and every shift in every piece of the department. I would expect certain things to be happening, and then, until I find out that they are not, I'm not able to correct it. So under the current structure, one of the most significant things that has changed and is a part of this change is candidate investigations will be a component of the Internal Affairs Bureau. Every background investigation will be reviewed up the chain of command in Internal Affairs before it goes anywhere else. The previous structure did not have that. There was not, I'm limited into the specifics of what I can say, but I can tell you that was not happening. There are a number of other reforms that I am proposing that the city attorney is reviewing to make sure that we are able to do so in a legal way. But one thing that is very important to me is at the end of this process, there needs to be community input on each sworn member who is hired. So I would like to include a member or two of this commission if that's possible. And that's something that we're legally researching. And if that is legally possible, that's something that will be coming before the commissioners to be a part of the final decision. Yeah, so there's a number of reforms. I'm limited in what I'm allowed to discuss publicly, but that is the general theme.
Commissioner Smith? Commissioner Smith, we can't hear you.
All right, let's try again. Better? Yeah, thank you. I want to thank you for what I feel is your sincere commitment to this work and to really deeply meaningful change. And I've heard you in the community and felt the same thing. And I wanted to first comment on your recognition of trauma. I've been a part of different conversations about the trauma that our city has experienced. I'm not convinced yet that we have a structure in place to really deal with that trauma. And it's not going to be a series of community meetings in the evening for a couple of hours. It really brings to mind to me, from a justice and human rights perspective, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission kind of work. And maybe that's a perspective that can form the work of this commission as well. So I invite you to keep thinking about that in this work. A month ago, we were in a community conversation about the hiring of Mr. Timberlake. And I have to be honest with you that I did not find your explanations of the information that you shared convincing to me. I was disappointed. And so my question tonight is, what have you learned from that experience going forward and over the last month?
Thank you. Shoot, I'm sorry. Is that, yes, thank you. I appreciate your comments. You know, I think what I've learned is obviously there are, I cannot take anything for granted that processes here would be working and be as necessarily thorough as they need to be. You know, I am kind of hamstrung by the law in things that I can say and when I can comment on things and when I can't. And that is very different from where I'm from. Where I'm from, to me, is much more straightforward. And so, you know, the laws here are different around data and that type of thing. So that has made it difficult for me, where I would typically just be very blunt in my responses. I can't help it if, and I know there's, you know, there's trolls on Twitter and all this other stuff that want to shoot me down over these things. I don't care. If you think I came halfway across the continent and left my sons and my wife in New Jersey to sit here and maintain this status quo, you're mistaken. So, I mean, that's as simple as I can put it. I can tell you, you know, if you fell for that, thinking that I was behind that or was in some way, you know, dishonest about it, there's a long road ahead, because this is going to be a bumpy road. And I do not plan on maintaining the status quo here. So to the extent that people are beginning to learn that, people who have power, whether informally or otherwise, are not necessarily going to be an ally of mine. And I am aware there are definitely people shooting at me, trying to take me out. But honestly, I don't care, because the work that we have to do here in this police department, in this city, is too important to be bothered by nonsense like that. It should be expected that when I start disrupting things, that it's going to make people unhappy.
Commissioner Sturm?
Good evening. I had a question and a request. In some of my previous work and some of the work going on with the city right now, we talk a lot about alternative police responses. And in my experience and in my education, everyone's on board that police aren't supposed to be social workers, that we want to give experts the workload that the experts are good at and not throw everything on the police, you know, recognizing in the past 40 years we've dismantled our social services programs and just thrown everything on the police. Now our jails are our #1 mental health institutions in this country. So everybody seems to be on the same page about alternative police responses, but something happens either in the politics or in the nitty-gritty on the floor somewhere where there's a huge roadblock where it becomes, don't take this work away from the cops. So I was just wondering, are you on board with all these different funding ideas? And would you be willing to champion those different funding ideas for different responses that aren't necessarily uniformed? Because, I mean, we have precedent in this city for active police chiefs, politically or not, so.
Thank you. I could respond better if you could give me some specifics, but I can tell you, we do not have enough people we do not have enough sworn members to be doing all of the things that we need to be doing and to be doing it as thoroughly as we need to. You just heard a presentation around domestic violence. That's a challenge. And some of that comes down to having enough sworn members. But it also comes down to being able to reallocate some more functions that sworn members are doing to non-sworn personnel, whether that's civilian members of the department or some other agency. I was not here when the BCR response pilot program was initiated, but from what I have been told internally, there was a lot of resistance to that. But I can tell you today, my own experience here over the last 8 months, in the beginning, it wasn't when I first started here, it wasn't necessarily 24 hours. And the cops on the street would go crazy if, you know, the BCR unit wasn't available. I mean, today they absolutely love it because they see the value of it. And we've gotten back from the county, we've gotten social workers embedded in our precincts. I don't believe they're up quite yet in all 5, but they will be. And I know how important that is because, and street cops know this too, because there's certain addresses or certain places that you wind up going to over and over and over again because there's nobody else to call, and we're the ones who will show up. But if we did have a social worker or someone else available, we might actually be able to fix the underlying reason that's creating us to have to go there in the first place. So the other reason why it's so important to get cops out of things that they shouldn't be doing is you'll notice the first thing that happens whenever there's a dramatic reduction in the police force, whether it's layoffs or like here, there was mass attrition, the things that go first in that type of crisis is exactly what you need the most. You know, community engagement, that kind of stuff disappears because you have to keep responding, you have to keep pace with 911 calls, and violence is going up. So you have to have people that are available to, you know, investigate those crimes, which takes a lot of time. If we are better able to get stuff like that out off of our plate, we will have more time to doing what's most important. So I do believe that we need more officers. Of course, this is not sustainable where we are, but we also need to continue to support alternatives to policing, sort of restorative programs, and really, you know, prevention in the first place. I'm trying to have a good relationship with a lot of the community-based violence prevention groups that are here in the city. That's something that I was very much involved with in my previous job, and I look to continuing to find ways to support them as well, because I think that's part of the answer also is the community-based organizations having a bit more ownership, having the funding and having the resources that they need to do some of the preventative work in the community that winds up then being publicly people point the finger at the police department. And we're not the best trained or suited to deal with some of these issues.
Please state your name.
That works. I'm Mara Shanfield. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your thoughtful comments. I have a lot of questions, but the one I'm going to ask you is you've talked a lot about the MDHR, the implementation of that consent decree. What do you think going forward will be the biggest challenges in coming to agreement with the feds?
I think, I think that's largely a legal question regarding what's going to be in an agreement or what's not. The federal side, I know what that looks like. I've been through it before, so I know exactly what it looks like. I know how it feels to be on the police side in court and internally in a police department trying to implement reforms and gain community and buy-in. And honestly, even some of the people are the same that are going to be involved in this. The way that plays out is, I think, differences between the two, I would say, depending on who the federal judge is, and I think almost certainly there will be much more involvement by a judge in the process. I think, I know we'll have probably 1 or 2 attorneys locally from the U.S. Attorney's Office involved working with us, as well as 1 or 2 from Maine Justice in D.C. And those folks are very experienced in doing this work. It's not going to be the first police department they've done it in. One of the members involved in the investigation here was someone I knew because I worked with in the consent decree in Newark. So I think, I think being who we are, Minneapolis, I think because of everything that's happened, I think everyone kind of has a heightened awareness of how important this is. So I'm hopeful that all of the different players involved will be, as dedicated as possible to actually making change real, because that's not a given. In the federal process, you'll have a federal judge, you'll have the city and being, the city attorney and the police department on one side. Then on the other side, you'll have, the DOJ and Maine DOJ. But you also have an independent monitor, and you also have a judge. I think depending on who all of those players are and how they see their role in this can have an impact on how well this goes. And there's a lot of variation in how that plays out. There just is from city to city. New Orleans, for example, the federal judge there is known for just showing up at the police department and showing up at precincts and that kind of thing. In Newark, I would see the federal judge probably 3 or 4 times a year in court, and it was quicker than I anticipated it would be. So I mean, there's a lot of variation between then who the monitor is and how they view their role in these things. Some cities like Oakland, it's been almost 20 years they've been under a federal consent decree. And a criticism that you will hear from that process is the way it's set up. There's almost a sort of perverse incentive for monitors to continue to monitor. Because as long as they have to stay appointed by the court to monitor, they continue to get paid year after year. And it is not their job to actually implement reform. That's not their job. They're just there to call balls and strikes. So, I mean, and this is stuff that is, these are big challenges. So I think, I'm hoping that being who we are and everything that's been through and sort of everything that DOJ has learned over the last, 25 plus years since they've been doing this, that there will be a lot of incentives for everyone involved in this process to actually help in a meaningful way and ensure that we're doing something that's real for our residents to experience. Yeah.
Commissioner Gurian Sherman. I don't think your mic is working.
Can you hear me now? Yep. I'm Stacy Gurian Sherman. I'm absolutely bowled over by what you said earlier, that you talked about some changes in state law, and you can't say, and I appreciate that, but there are 4 council members who voted against this commission because they didn't feel that it had enough clout in the disciplinary process, because you, as the chief under state law, have the final say. So to hear you say that that is something that you're willing to see if can be changed is really something that I think will address this community's frustration for the last 50 years, where from the time you report a complaint till the time it's resolved, and this is noted in the reports, can be 2, 3, 4 years, and in the meantime, the officer may have committed other offenses that haven't been addressed. So to hear you talk about that, I would just really encourage you, as you work with the city attorney, as you work with our Minneapolis delegation in changing state law, that maybe Minneapolis, because of the consent decrees, can be a pilot program in allowing a police oversight commission like ours to have more clout, because I think that is a frustration even for the council members who voted for this commission. I just have one quick question. You talked about listening sessions, and they have to be done over and over and over again. I completely agree, but then you also talked about officers who feel that they've been painted with a broad brush. How are you going to reconcile those two things? Because 5 of us commissioners were at the US DOJ listening session last week, and there was pent-up frustration that really permeated that meeting. And when people are going to talk honestly, then those officers may still feel they're painted with a broad brush. So how do you reconcile that?
Those are really, really thoughtful comments. Thank you. The first part on discipline, I would just point out that the problem with the time constraints and how long all this stuff takes does not work for anybody. Right. I think community looks at us and they think that, we don't take it seriously because these things take so long. And I think the police officers look at it and think it's an illegitimate system. A fundamental concept of discipline should be that we are trying to correct behavior, right? We don't necessarily need to have the death penalty for everything, but we need to be able to do something relatively close in time to when bad behavior occurs. And so I don't think the setup works, as good as it could for cops, and I don't think it works as good as it could for community. So definitely open to more. I have my own ideas and opinions on that, but that's reforming that so that we could have a system that is just more effective, able to address bad behavior more closely in time to when it occurs, and actually get more buy-in from our police officers at the same time. I think that's possible, that they could view the system as being more fair, just like our residents could view a system as being more fair. As far as the officers being painted with a broad brush, I do think that's true. But I also think, I think it's necessary for our residents to be able to voice their frustrations with us. I think it's probably more true to me personally than it is to any one of them. I think I need to be present as much as possible to be on the receiving end of, whatever experiences and frustrations people want to vent at these types of listening sessions. But I don't think that's the same as the sentiment I was trying to describe before. I think in general, the police officers who have remained, who are still carrying all of that trauma, just like our residents are, and our residents who have lived through very similar things at the same time, I think that's different than police who are a part of this process, who are committed to it, simply hearing people's frustrations. And I think it's possible that an officer who does feel like that could hear a resident express their frustration, and I think it's possible that that same resident might actually listen into the officer's perspective and say, and then at the end of it say, hey, I didn't know you were out there for 20 hours all of those days with you couldn't get a bathroom relief, and you couldn't get water, and you couldn't get food. I didn't know they did that to you. You know, I didn't know they cancel your days off. I didn't know they do. Like, I think that's really possible. At the same time, an officer could hear a resident's frustrations and their own personal experience about maybe an officer said or did or didn't do. And I think it's possible for people to actually hear and see each other. Might not happen the first time, might not happen for a long time, but I do think that's really possible. Because I think there are more similarities in those shared experiences, that shared trauma, than there are differences. Yeah.
Commissioner Newman.
Thank you, Chief. I do appreciate that a lot. I think it is truly necessary to bridge that gap between community and police. So having these neighborhood table talks and opportunities, yes, it's more than 2 hours, you know, just an open session. I personally would like to know the officers that do patrol my neighborhood as well. I'd love to know them on a first name basis and for them to recognize me as well. And then, you know, to humanize the officers as well, and to humanize the community to them, vice versa. And yeah, to be able to have those discussions, to allow the officers to cuss, to allow the community to cuss and release all of that. And give, yes, as you spoke, you know, a lot of the meeting, when we went to the meeting last week for DOJ, you know, that's really what it was about. There wasn't really too much structure given from them, so it was an opportunity for a community that was there to release and throw questions at them that they couldn't come back and answer. But I appreciate that, and also, you know, I would like to see you hear more at our meetings when we come to a place where we're creating a resolution, and then you may not be able to give your opinion, but for you to see for your own eyes what we're seeing too, and hopefully we'll be on the same page, and to just kind of get your response, and then, yeah, no, just to bridging that gap is super important.
Commissioner Lohr.
Hi, thank you. A number of the reports that we've been reading, you know, have talked about sort of patterns of behavior, whether that's patterns of bias or other kinds of structural issues with policing in Minneapolis. And I know that some of the recommendations are for things like implicit bias training and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, there is also conflicting research about the success of implicit bias training. So what I wanted to ask was, beyond mandated training, can you talk to us a little bit about how you hope to move the culture of the police department so that it is no longer a culture that, as the reports would indicate, you know, is implicitly biased?
I would agree that's the heart of the issue. It is culture. I'm aware of, I think, some of the same studies that you reference. You know, there was a lot of excitement maybe close to 10 years ago when, you know, implicit bias was starting to become a thing in police training around the country. There was a lot of excitement with that. And clearly that alone doesn't change things, right? It is deep, it's complicated, but I think under the MDHR agreement and under any resulting federal consent decree, the training that we would have to be, for anything, would have to be, you know, adult-based learning. I think a lot of these themes sort of are intertwined with one another. So even though we might have to do separate training on use of force or stop, search, and arrest or implicit bias and those types of things, there is more intertwined between all of them than there is that separates them. And I think how we go about creating better scenario-based training in everything that we do, and thinking about these things as we do them, and who is involved in the training and how it is presented, I think are all cultural issues that we have to be, you know, very intentional about how we think. Under a federal consent decree, the training would have to be approved by everybody involved, and you know, the judge would have to review things, the monitor and the DOJ and so on. And there's deep experience in how this is played out in other cities that I think could be helpful for us. But I think it goes back to, again, regardless of all the legal requirements we're going to have to do, which are very important, and I am not downplaying them at all, but I really do believe it comes down to more day-to-day stuff that happens here. It comes down to other things that are not in the agreement. That's what culture actually is. And how, that's why today, again, is very important that I have people who I believe are the right people who have the same outlook and values that I do to start pushing this stuff down. Because it is much more than any list of requirements. It is about how we see ourselves and our role in community and everything that we do. It's about, it could be, there's things that are, there's a number of things that I've changed here already that were not mandated by any agreement. For example, the maximal restraint technique and the hobble, as it's called here. I saw that, and there was a recent settlement where that was involved, and I just think that's inhumane, and we got rid of it. And I think things like that are cultural, because there was definitely pushback when I did that, and people thought, you know, I was going to get a cop hurt or killed because they wouldn't have something else to do. You don't need that. You wouldn't have that in the East Coast in major cities. You don't need it. Other things that aren't quite as dramatic, simply how officers respond to emergencies. I have seen here multiple times, because I don't stay, I get criticized for this, but I don't just come here 9 to 5 and stay chained to a desk. I tend to be out in the street and in community, and I want to see how cops are acting at scenes. And some of the things I've noticed just since I've been here that were changed, because I do believe are also cultural and speak to that. When I first got here, there was a murder. It's Lowry. Lowry is divided. It has the middle in it, right? Yeah. So there's a murder by the convenience store there, just past Lindale in the winter at night, and there's like a, you know, it's a 4-lane road. The convenience store is here. One of the person who was killed, you know, ran from the store and died in the street. And next to the street is a big, wide, open field. So people around could see this person's body. And the most we had was a sheet from the ambulance, because the ambulance didn't take him to the hospital. That, to a lot of folks in community, communicates disrespect. That the person is left there, which is beyond our control, because we're not the ambulance. If the ambulance chooses to pronounce someone dead, they don't take dead people to the hospital. We have to wait for the medical examiner. At the same time, and street cops are very well aware of this, it can be very upsetting to community. So now, you know, when I spoke to people here about that, they told me that, well, that's a best practice, it's how they do things. It's not what's best for our community. So now all the sergeants have, you know, screens, and our crime scene unit has a much larger tent, just simply to show respect for people in the beginning. And I think a lot of this stuff culturally is about stuff like that. Another thing that was obvious to me when I got here, a lot of times you would go to a scene, a crime scene, an incident, and after the fact, once things were over, when things are an emergency, we're showing up however we have to get there, and the police cars are going to be left however, and it is what it is, because it's potentially a life and death issue. But once things are over, the car's got to be moved. I don't want to see residents have to drive around the block because cops are just standing around and not, unless they're actually, you know, still doing something. I mean, I think it's things like that that are cultural, that communicate and show respect for our residents. And so that's why I think, and I don't mean to keep going on, but I do think it's important to address those things, but I also think it's important to constantly, every day, be trying to identify the officers who are doing it right and lifting up those good behaviors and try and correct the bad behaviors as quickly as possible. And that's something that you have to be very conscious about, because especially in a time where we're trying to encourage de-escalation and all these types of things, engagement, you have to be looking for those good results, because otherwise you're not going to see them. You're only going to see the bad things. So I think it's about trying to make sure that all of our people in positions of authority are on the lookout for stuff like that, and they're able to correct it when they see it, but they're also able to start rewarding and encouraging all of the good behaviors that we want to see. And a lot of that involves stuff that is not actually law enforcement.
Commissioner Williams.
Oh, I'm sorry.
How are you going to involve the youth of the change in the culture of the police? Being a teacher for over 20 years, how are you going to involve the youth and to have that more respect and tamper down, youth violence and crime and stuff?
So thank you. One thing that is starting to come back is the Police Activities League, trying to do things and involve officers with young people, in activity settings, sports and that type of thing, something that Minneapolis had a very robust program here in the past that we need to try and build up again. That's one thing that's happening. There's also, for at-risk young people, I've been screaming about this for several months, about trying to have greater resources and just trying to have greater accountability over young people that are, engaged in some really, really risky behavior. And we've gotten some changes. The county attorney here has made some significant changes, both around, trying to have more prevention, but also, trying to resolve cases and charge cases much more quickly with juveniles. We've gotten some help. Something that I think was really troubling is we had a number of young people earlier this year who were involved in activities with stolen cars that we were encountering over and over and over again. And we, as a system, were sending the wrong message. What was happening was these kids were coming in, and I literally mean kids, sometimes 11 years old. They're coming in multiple times in a stolen car with a gun or having been present during a robbery or that kind of thing. And we were simply immediately releasing them back into the same environment with no support and no help. So that's something that has just started to change. But I think the real challenge for us, and we're starting to see some results from that, but the real challenge from us is, like what you said, is engaging with young people in a more intentional way, in a more preventative way. And that's a challenge, particularly, again, around the issue of staffing. And that's not something that the police can approach and look at it like, young people are, small adults, because they're not. That's something that has to be a very well thought out strategy. So it's something that we are thinking of and thinking about doing more intentionally. We've been involved with creating a youth violence intervention group. And I have had conversations with some of the community-based groups that do outreach to our young people. But I do think there is a need for a targeted, engagement around young people, but that's something that would have to have a very specific strategy around it, and it's something that we would need a partner to do in order to get it right, a partner that is experienced with engagement around young people, because that's not something that police can just walk into.
Thank you, and that was Commissioner Williams Johnson. My apologies for just using half your name.
I just wanted to add, kind of piggyback off what you're saying, add to that, the focus of youth, but also the focus of the youth, the parents of these same individual youth as well, is very necessary for everybody on both sides to take accountability. So we can't forget that piece. If that's their child, they got to walk hand in hand with them, and let's experience this to fix this all together. Because as community, we're here, open arms, trying to assist a child that's not our own. But at the same time, the parents need to be greatly involved. So whatever type of program is very, very necessary to incorporate the parents in there in every aspect.
And just to be clear, absolutely. But there have been, our police officers have been in contact with, at times, parents who are screaming for help, literally. And we don't have the resources to connect them with. I first became a police chief in November of this year. In that month, a 12-year-old was shot 2 different times. And both times it involved stolen cars. And in between those two times, he was caught by the sheriff's office in a stolen car also. And so mom was at the hospital because he was in a stolen car when it happened, and the child wasn't going to be detained or anything. And mom was literally begging the sheriff's officer and the police officer there, please keep him. I can't keep him safe. And that's unfortunately reality. And it is, I mean, I've spoken to officials at the county about this. I mean, I know there are more efforts today than there had been before, but a lot of times, you know, we as a system, the whole thing has to do a better job at providing services and support, especially for parents who are screaming that they need it. So, yeah.
Is there a commissioner who hasn't had a chance to ask their question that has one?
Mine will take 5 seconds.
Okay,
And
I
that
just want to make sure that if there's a commissioner that has a question that hasn't had one, to give them that opportunity. If not, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Chief O'Hara if you would mind staying for the public comment. It's only going to be 5 people, 2 minutes each, but I don't know if they are going to address anything to you, but I think it's valuable to hear from the people who have stayed here.
I can definitely come back. I have an engagement at 7 o'clock that I'm a little late for. I was supposed to be out of here by 7, but I didn't want to. I will definitely come back, though, if I'm invited.
I appreciate that. I also just want to say about trainings, it's a managerial right, so the city has a lot of authority to get into trainings that are needed. And it doesn't just have to be an agreement with all the parties in the consent decrees.
Yeah. I think it's helpful, though. The only reason why I reference that, and there's just an abundance of requirements of training, the only reason why I reference that is I think it is helpful for us to have as many experts as possible reviewing what the training is, and also independently observing and monitoring how it actually is rolled out, because that's what happens with this stuff. I think that's really, really valuable, because both it'll let us know if implementation is not going according to plan or if it's not achieving the results that we're hoping for. But 2, if an independent monitor, independent observer reporting to the court observes it and says they're getting it right, then we know that something is working too.
Thank you. I do have one final question. So the community sessions on police policies, for instance, August 15th, the policy type is use of force. Is there going to be some sort of presentation about those policies and then discussion, or how will those sessions look?
Exactly. A higher level overview, regarding the topics, a presentation on that, and then more of a facilitated discussion. And that'll be the start of trying to get community input. But there'll be multiple methods for doing that on each topic. And there also is the ability to submit public comment online. So yeah, it is our intention to receive and to respond to as much of the public comment as we can, and to try and incorporate as much of it as we can into policy.
Thank you. Last chance, commissioners, do you have any questions for Chief O'Hara? No. Thank you so much for your time, and we apologize for making you late, but we're glad that you did stay. Thank you, and you will be invited back. Thank you. Item 8 on the agenda is a presentation about Minnesota open meeting law by Mr. Joel Fussy, Assistant City Attorney. And again, commissioners, I ask if you let him get through his presentation and then ask any questions that you have. And I will request, do you have a PowerPoint? Oh, okay, then I won't be requesting your PowerPoint. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Joel Fussy again from the City Attorney's Office. I have the pleasure of being able to attend all of your monthly meetings. I was asked to give a quick training on the open meeting law topic tonight. I'm going to be very quick. I think I can hit the highlights that you need to know, and also at the top let you know that if any questions arise through the performance of your duties on this commission or on the panels, you can always contact myself or my office, and we'll make sure that you get your questions answered. So I just want to give you a brief familiarity with Minnesota's open meeting law. This document that I'm passing around was, I believe, prepared by the state legislative research branch, and it's a very good and pretty concise summary. It has an executive summary, so I think it in and of itself kind of hits the high points that you need to know. But basically, Minnesota's open meeting law dates back to 1957, so it's been around a long time in different iterations. It's kind of in the category of a good governance law, and the Supreme Court has specifically said that its three prongs or tenets of it are to prohibit actions being taken at a secret meeting where it is impossible for the interested public to become fully informed about a board's decision or to detect improper influences. Second, to ensure that the public's right to be informed. And third, to afford the public an opportunity to present its views to the public body. There isn't a ton of case law on this topic, but there certainly is some. I think the lesson to be learned in that is that courts interpret the law very liberally and in favor of openness. One of the things, however, it doesn't necessarily dictate every topic that maybe some people would like to see or that some people might think is in there. The open meeting law does not address whether a governmental body must keep or publish meeting minutes, whether it must hold meetings for particular purposes, or even allow members of the public to address the body. Obviously, as a body, you do allow public comment. It's very valuable. It also, there can be other sources that factor into that decision or those decisions for what other facets might be deemed important by various public bodies. There could be the ordinances. There could be bylaws that you adopt, which you're kind of in the process of doing now, or at least going to begin that process. And there could also be outside agreements like consent decrees that we just spoke of, which to some degree does have, you know, some provisions that talk about the functioning of this system and this sort of body. One thing to keep in mind, on the state level, this law is kind of administered by the Department of Administration. They have a website, which I think is in here, where they have a lot of good opinions and a lot of good advice in there on this topic and also other topics that they talk about, such as the Government Data Practices Act. So that's another resource that you can use. Moving along quickly, because I want to keep things going here, the groups or the types of groups that are governed by the open meeting law, essentially it applies to all levels of state and local government, the governing body of any city in particular, any committees or subcommittees or commissions of a public body are subject to the law. And then also an entity can basically enact an authorizing ordinance or law that makes themselves applicable to the open meeting law, and your governing ordinance does that as well. So there's certainly no debate that the commission here is subject to the open meeting law. Excuse me. One of the main tenets of the open meeting law is that governings of less than a quorum of the public body are not subject to the law. And that's why, you know, I'm sure you've noticed that we're very aware of when there might be a quorum. That can come up in various different settings. One of the things that gets talked about a lot is members using, you know, email or other types of communication, text messages, social media, whatever it might be at this day and age, with the purpose of kind of subverting the open meeting law. And that means essentially having a quorum of the public body involved in some back and forth in something that hasn't been noticed, isn't open to the public, whether that's on email or something else. There's also a concept of a kind of a serial meeting where if the intent is there to kind of decide an issue without having the public debate, and there were serial meetings or serial emails, kind of like a phone tree of the old days, where, you know, there was never a quorum on one of the communications, but it was designed to kind of get a quorum all aligned on some action that was going to be taken at the next meeting, for instance. That could also be adjudged to be a violation of the open meeting law. So that's kind of the general principle there is that, we need to avoid having you be in a quorum or trying to patch together a quorum when you're not in a public meeting or when you're not discussing things publicly. Let's see, that doesn't necessarily apply to, there might be mass notices that you get that have to do with purely administrative things, schedules of meetings and things along those lines. That's what we're really talking about here, is kind of formulating a decision on an action that you're authorized to take. So if you're trying to, come together to some agreement on, who the vice chair or the chair was going to be at the next election or things along those lines, that could be something that would be taken into account there. Moving along here, it also doesn't apply to chance or social gatherings. So if there was some function and you did the counting and you saw that there was more than a quorum of you at any given event, a social event or some community event, that wouldn't in and of itself violate the open meeting law, but you need to be aware that at that point we can't be talking shop, essentially, is what it comes down to. The city's very good. I think we try to, even kind of maybe overcompensate and make sure that we're not putting you in situations where there could be quorums and then unbeknownst to, your intentions, you end up inadvertently violating that sort of provision. But that's one of the exceptions that applies there. Okay, the main requirements of the open meeting law is obviously that meetings that are subject to it must be open to the public, as this meeting is. The votes must be recorded. There must be a journal at least that records the votes, and the meeting must be open to the public. Secret ballots aren't allowed. You may recall when we did the election for the chair and the vice chair, it's something where we had to have that recorded, and people, it can be a little maybe uncomfortable for that sort of a vote, but that's one of the provisions that secret type ballots aren't allowed, so that's why that took place. Another area that is kind of emerging, especially after the pandemic, is the ability to have remote meetings or remote participation by you as commissioners. You may notice we've stopped that on, I think, the first organizational meeting or two that was in place, but that's the requirements to have that sort of remote participation are actually very high. Generally, that you have to notice where you're going to be participating in a remote location, and it has to be open to the public as well. So theoretically, if it was your home, that would have to be noticed. It would be very difficult. So the city's general position on remote meetings is that, or remote participation, is that we discourage it and try to avoid it, just because realistically and procedurally it's a very high bar to be able to do that. So generally on this commission, if you're not able to be here because you're sick or if something else, you're not going to be able to participate in the meeting, at least in terms of casting a vote. You could certainly watch along or monitor the meeting as it's happening, but you probably will not be able to participate in it. There are some exceptions that have to do, obviously, with pandemics or declared emergencies. So if that should, knock on wood, happen again, in terms of some sort of declared emergency, there are procedures that the clerk is aware of and we'd be able to institute in which your meeting schedule could go on. Hopefully, again, we don't get to that point. At least one copy of any printed materials prepared for the public body must be distributed or made available to all members of the public. That's why I believe there's a table back there that contains the agenda, and I put some of the documents I'm using here, and any of the documents that are referenced on the agenda should be at least available for inspection by the public. I spoke about the emergency meetings and those sorts of provisions. Oh, and then the last topic maybe is there are a few general exceptions to the open meeting law. It doesn't apply generally to disciplinary type hearings, and that's obviously because you all will serve on the panels, and that obviously involves private data and the potential disciplinary process. That's pretty clear that's why those sorts of meetings, or that facet, that bifurcation of your duties, is going to not be in a public type meeting, whereas this, where it's a more general policy based meeting, is certainly open to the public. There are a couple other exceptions. Labor negotiations, there's some attorney-client privilege things for actual pending or threatened litigation. Again, those aren't things that generally this commission is going to be involved with, but that's kind of more of the general exceptions that are available to our city council or to other public bodies. And there's a couple other exceptions that I don't think are really, again, applicable to this commission. There was recently, one of the most recent enactments did address social media in terms of the open meeting law, and it states that the use of social media by members of the public body does not violate the chapter so long as the social media use is limited to exchanges with all members of the general public. I would let you know, though, however, the city does have a social media policy, and so if that's something that you're curious about or interested in at all, by all means, please check that out and then ask any questions through staff or through my office, and we'd be glad to kind of walk you through that. There are some potential penalties for violations of the open meeting law. They're generally civil penalties of up to $300, so some fines that are there. It generally focuses upon intentional violations, and there's even some provisions that would allow for the collection of attorney's fees. Again, that generally focuses more on the intentional type violations, but it's that is there to show you that it's definitely a substantive and a serious law and a topic that you need to be aware of at this sort of level. And then if any questions come up, as I said, please funnel them through my office. There also is a provision, as I said, the Department of Administration does administer the open meeting law, and they also have a more formal process to get like a formal opinion on a topic. If there was something that really got into the weeds or was an important topic, there is kind of the more formal process to get a determination or at least an opinion by the Department of Administration on that topic. But generally, day-to-day type questions that come up, as I said, just please you feel free to use my office and the staff as a resource. And that's kind of your quick and dirty introduction to the open meeting law. If you do have any questions, please let me know right now. I can try to answer some, or else, as I said, feel free to contact our office. Thanks, guys.
No questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much. Item 9 on the agenda is the chair report. That's me. So the chair report was linked on the agenda. Hopefully you had a chance to look at it. And I also included up at the top under the Community Commission on Police Oversight, there's a link where you can go directly to our page on the city's website in case you didn't already know that. And I've also included instructions on how to sign up for update emails. So like when the agenda is posted, you'll get an email saying that there's new information. But there's also like a plethora of other things you can sign up for on that site, all manner, county organizations, like other city stuff. It's really interesting. So if you would like to receive an email when there's information uploaded, that's how you do it. Director Jefferson, do you know what did everyone get on July 31st an email with a Survey Monkey to tell us your preferred date for meetings? Do you know if everyone
Shanice, could you?
Okay, would you? Okay, thank you. Oh, but first on there is this is the same information that Vice Chair Reeves shared last time with the dates for suggested agenda items. You'll notice that November 6th has an asterisk next to it. That may change, which we'll talk about later. We'll talk about it now because it's next. Vice Chair Reeves and I have requested that the November 14 meeting be rescheduled to November 6th because the two of us are going to be attending the NACOL conference, and so neither of us would be here to preside over the meeting. And we're just waiting to find out if this room is available on November 6th. And as soon as we know, we'll let you know, but we're hoping that we are far enough out so that you can make arrangements to be here on a new date. And speaking of NACOL, if you haven't already looked at their website, I really encourage you to visit it. There's a lot of resources on there that you can get. Like there's a webinar for Civilian Oversight 101. I mean, there's a lot of reports and information on that NACOL site that you can access for free. That's that. All right, now for the fun stuff. So what you received about committees is my recommendation. I'll just repeat that. It's my recommendation. And at first, I just laid out some sort of guidance on how we'll go about forming the committees. Has everyone read it, or we've all read it? Okay, thank you. Great, good job. So my original plan was to go through here, take a vote on the guidelines, take a vote on each committee, but is there any objection to the guidelines or the committees that I'm recommending? Commissioner Gary and Sherman. Oh.
I think this is first of all, I think this is great information. I think you pulled together a lot of things in the committees that we're looking for. I think it's a great place to start. I can't make a determination without further discussion. I'd like to hear from my fellow commissioners, so I would like to propose and make a motion that we table discussion till the next meeting so that we have more time to read it. I personally haven't had a chance to see how it meshes with the powers that are enumerated in the ordinance. You asked for suggestions for other committees. So I think in the interest of time, so we can get to public comment, again, I would just make a motion to table this and have it at front and center on the agenda for
September.
For September, thank you.
I had to think about it too. Okay, so there is a motion to table this discussion and formation of committees and all that until September. Is there a second? Okay. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Olson, Paul Olson. Thank you. We are forgetting to say our names before we speak. Sorry. That's okay, I forgot too. Is there any discussion? Sure.
Commissioner Shanfield, do we have a sense of when we'll start reviewing the cases? Because I think we also want to think about workload, and I want to put energy into where it's needed as well.
I don't have the answer to that. That's not a me question.
Thank you. Right now, we're waiting for the law enforcement. We need to train them. So I'm waiting for their schedule to be open for their training. And once we get that done, we're ready for to start the panels. So we're just waiting for law enforcement, MPD, to get on board with their training, and we should be ready to go. I don't have a straight answer for you right now, but I'm in the process of having that done. Go ahead.
You got to turn yours off.
Oh, sorry.
Would you then want us to go ahead with committees before we started with the panels? What would your recommendation be?
I believe if there's something interesting that you think that it needs attention or something you would like to look at, I would definitely encourage to start looking at research. As you well know, research takes a long time. So I would for sure encourage that.
And if I could just add, so if we determine that we want to have any of these 3 committees that I'm recommending tonight, I don't foresee in the next month you really having anything to do because we've still got to get together and figure out a meeting date, a meeting location, notify the public, because these are open meetings as well. So just consider that. Yes, Commissioner Smith.
Commissioner Smith, how would the membership of the committees be determined? Would the chair assign membership, or would
It's
volunteer? Or
self-selecting, and I don't know what I will do if all 15 of us want to be on one committee, because I think there's no need for 15 on a committee, but I guess we would cross that. But it's self-selecting, and then after the committee has been self-selected, that committee would then nominate among those a chair, and then those who have decided they want to be on that committee would elect their chair. And then the chair would start working with me, Director Jefferson, to figure out a meeting cadence, meeting location, so that we can start notifying the public that there's this committee and they will be meeting on this date. Thank you. Commissioner Lohr.
Thank you, Commissioner Josh Lohr. If we were to vote on your proposal this evening, there's nothing prohibiting us from, say, proposing further
No, there
committees,
isn't.
right?
No, there isn't.
Down the road? Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I just ask that you send the name of the committee and some sort of explanation, much like I've tried to explain here, and we would do the same process. Vote and decide if we want that committee, who wants to be on it, and then pick a chair, meeting dates, and
Same
all
process.
that.
Great,
Yes.
thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Commissioner Gary and Sherman.
Yes, Stacy. I would really, speaking to the motion to table, my expectation is that we would all discuss this. I'm not prepared to vote on this because I just haven't heard enough feedback. And I was expecting that discussion before we would make a concrete decision. So I understand what you're saying, but I personally would prefer not to take a vote on something that we haven't had discussion. And I do note the time, it's 8:12. We haven't had anybody speaking from the public. So I don't think, given what the chair has said, and about the need to have open meetings, that it would do us any harm. It would do us a lot of good to engage in that discussion next meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Reeves. Vice Chair Reeves, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So what I'll say is these committee descriptions are pretty self-explanatory. I think the chairs can make them more detailed if they so choose. This is a great start. I would propose that we get started and get the committee set, and then if there is any additional committees, that we can bring those forward, but I would like to vote on these tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more discussion, questions? Commissioner Clement?
Yeah, is it on? Okay. I would like to just ask a clarifying question.
Okay.
You guys are proposing these separate committees. For instance, maybe us four are on a committee, those four are on, so breaking us up into smaller committees.
That is correct.
And then maybe with this community one, we would be able to reach the community faster, and then the whole end of the meeting thing would also be resolved. So I second you wanting to resolve this tonight, because if we do that, then the community then technically wouldn't have to wait a month to see us again if we voted on that tonight just by having smaller committees.
Well, I will just say, I don't know if the committee would if the community would get to see you in the next month, and transparency, because you'll have to figure out some things, where you're going to meet, and let the public know. But the exciting thing about this committee is that you would be really thinking about how we reach out to the public, and so that would start sooner.
And what
Thank
I'll
you.
just add for clarifying, I fully expect that, for example, community outreach committee, let's say I was the chair of that committee, that meeting would be scheduled next 2 weeks, and then we would get that information to Ms. Watts and then start getting that together. I think we need to start getting those things going. And as long as someone's willing to do the work, because again, the vice chair and the chair can start the committee, then they would vote for their chair. It did not have to be us, but they're gonna kind of get things started. We can get these meetings scheduled. I have a lot of practice in this part, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Reeves. Yes, Mr. Fussy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to check with staff. I was aware that Director Jefferson had had some discussion with the city clerk's office about establishing committees, and it seemed like there needed to be some more discussion on that area. So I don't know if you have an update on that, but I don't know exactly what the city clerk's capacity is at this point. I mean, obviously, and I entirely agree that for you to be able to function and do your work, you're going to need some sort of subgroup committee type structure. But the last communication that I saw from you, Director, there seemed to not necessarily be an agreement in place with the city clerk.
That is correct. Everyone hear me? Yeah, that is correct. So we're trying to move. That is correct. They didn't have any available information for me at the time. So what we're trying to do is just at least establish the committees and trying to follow up with more policies in order to give us a little bit more guidance.
Thank you. Is there any more discussion on the motion on the floor to table the committee vote until September? Yes, Commissioner Alwed.
So I don't want to be a stickler for the procedure, but technically there wasn't a second on that, so I don't know why we were having a discussion.
I thought there was a second. Commissioner Olson.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yes,
Beautiful.
I was paying attention
No,
that
you
time.
did.
Thank you.
I was not, clearly.
Listen, it's 8:16. Is there any more discussion? And the motion on the floor is to table the committee stuff until September. Hearing no more discussion, all those in favor of tabling this until September, please raise your hands. I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. All those opposed, please raise, lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hands. Oh, I can't count today. 7, thank you. The motion to table has failed. So we're back to the, my question was, is there any objection just to the, and I'm trying to save some time, but is there any objection to this general outlines and then the 3 committees and the general description of each of those committees? Commissioner.
So, I don't know if there is, but I do want to just make a motion to actually just formalize those 3. I personally think that this is good, so if I can get a second, we can just move forward with that.
Okay, so there is a motion to accept these recommended guidelines and committees. Is there a second? And that was Commissioner Sturm. Is there discussion? Commissioner Gary and Sherman. Thank you. We are self-selecting tonight before we leave while we're still in our open meeting. And then as far as meshing with our duties, the committee itself can decide, can look at the list. That's why the descriptions are kind of general, so they can look at it themselves. And also, if we see that there is something that we are not addressing, we all have the ability to come back and recommend additional committees with different instructions. So thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is to accept these general guidelines and the 3 committees laid out. All those in favor, please raise your hands. I'm gonna let somebody else count because I'm. Thank you. Lower your hands, please. All those opposed, please raise your hands. Thank you. You can lower your hand. The motion passes. So let's go. So Community Outreach Committee, I am recommending 5 to 7 of us on that committee. So the committees would be right now, Community Outreach, Police Policy Research and Recommendations, and then an Ad Hoc Governance Committee, which would be responsible for, this commission is supposed to have rules that we submit to the city council for approval, and that group would be responsible for drafting those rules and seeing it through the approval process. And the reason I'm calling it ad hoc is because I think that when that committee, when those rules are approved, that committee can dissolve until somebody sees a need for some more rules. But just a brief explanation of why I'm calling it an ad hoc committee. So this is what I would like. Who would like to be on the Community Outreach Committee? And first of all, ex officio members of all the committees would be the chair and the vice chair. And the vice chair is eligible to become a chair of a committee, and then she would no longer be considered ex officio, meaning that she'd be required to go to meetings and her attendance would count toward quorum, unlike an ex officio member whose attendance doesn't count toward quorum. Okay, just want to get that out there. So if you're interested in being on the Community Outreach Committee, please raise your hand. So we have Clement, Vorpal, is it Vorpal or Vorpal? Vorpal. Newman, Peterson, Gurian, Sherman. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5. Is anyone else interested in being on this committee?
Could you just repeat them again?
Oh, yes. Commissioner Clement. Am I shouting? Sorry. Commissioner Clement, Commissioner Vorpal, Commissioner Newman, Commissioner Peterson, and Commissioner Gurian Sherman. Anyone else? That's 1, 2, 3. That's 5. And I've suggested 5 to 7. That's it? Okay. So these are our committee members on community outreach. Clement, Vorpal, Newman, Peterson, Gurian, Sherman. And of those, are one of you interested in being the chair? What's up?
How about co-chairs?
We can do that later?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do that at the first meeting, yeah.
Are we good with tabling that first part? Yay, yes. Okay, we'll table that. Thank you. Thanks for that suggestion. Okay, next is the Police Policy Research and Recommendations Committee, and I've recommended the same 5 to 7 for that committee. Is anyone interested in that committee? I'm going to start on this side. Commissioner Shanfield. Commissioner Gurian Sherman, Commissioner Williams Johnson, thank you. Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Sturm, Commissioner Lohr, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that is that everyone? Say that again. I got her. Yes, I got her. I did skip her at first, but then I went back to her. Yeah, I got her. Thank you. Okay, and the Governance Ad Hoc Committee. the fun stuff. I'm only suggesting 3 to 4 people, so not a whole lot. Clement? Okay. I thought I saw a third hand. Okay, Olson. Anyone else? All right. So you, Commissioner Alwed, Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Clement, the Governance Ad Hoc Committee. And whenever y'all meet, you'll elect your chair. Thank you for that suggestion to save time. Okay. The governance. The Governance Ad Hoc Commissioner, Commissioner Alwed, Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Clement. And the, you don't want to hear the other ones? You got those? You got 3, right? Yeah, you got it. Okay, you got them. Okay. Okay, I'm almost to the end. Thank you for helping us get through our committee formation. But again, if you want to present a thought on an additional committee, if you could just send it to me with a description, and then we'll add it to the September agenda. And then the final thing, you'll see that I've listed all the community events, listening sessions, and my plan is to always have these at the bottom of this report. So if there are things that you know about, if you will just send them to me or a link or something. I will point out September 27th, Vice Chair Reeves and I are going to be speaking at lunch with Lisa. So if you'd like to go, I did include the email where you can RSVP. Okay. We are now to item 10, new business. Does anyone have any new business? You're tabling it, okay. Seeing no new, I had blank pages to write new business. Yes, Commissioner Lohr.
I just want to register a request that we still get a presentation from city staff on how to electronically communicate with us. Because that is a high priority, and it didn't come to
Yes,
this meeting.
yes, thank you. I did have an addition to my report, because I was going to talk about it and then I took it out, but Director Jefferson is going to talk about our communications issue.
So I think this is something that we've been addressing for the last couple of sessions here at our public meeting, the communications with the email. So the city clerk will be, has emails for everyone on the commission. Right now, they have to create passwords, but the city clerk, of course, is going to be in charge of these emails, not OPCR. They're going to oversee it. They're going to have to probably create policies for this as well to make sure we're not violating any data practices laws and open meeting laws. So that is coming. I'm going to get with the city's clerk's office this week to see if they're going to create any type of policies so we're not in any type of violation or data practices law or open meeting laws. Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Lohr, thank you for asking that. I was going to completely forget that Director Jefferson was going to address that. So be on the lookout for more information about that. Is there any other new business? Everybody's shaking their head. Girl, it's 8:29. Okay.
I actually have one thing.
Who said that? Oh, there you are.
Clement. I would like to know, and this is just for the sake of, I think, everyone. When I signed up, I did understand that the meetings were at 6, and I didn't see an end time. And so I am just wondering, for the sake of everyone, when is the end time to the meeting? Like a hard end time, so that we can ensure that the community, if they are waiting to hear everything we've learned in the meeting, and do you know?
So I do know what you're
Does that
saying,
make
and
sense?
it might fluctuate, but what I'm trying to do, I had a mental timeline, because I'm kind of scared right now to put it on paper, not really knowing, because I don't want to say something's going to take 10 minutes and it takes 35 minutes and then we're all off and we've said something that doesn't happen. But Director Jefferson and I went through this agenda like, okay, this is going to take this much. So I did have a mental timeline, which FYI, we're past. I mean, you know, no, but it's valid. And so, yeah, I don't know, I mean, I don't know what to tell you about a hard ending time for every meeting, but what I will commit to is putting some times on the agenda next time in print and not just in my head. If does that, I mean, that's like baby steps, so. Commissioner Newman?
I just want to add to that piece, you know, as you and Mr. Jefferson were discussing and reviewing it, and you deemed that a particular meeting may run a little bit longer. I don't know about the committee, maybe could we bump it up a half an hour, you know, maybe start at 5:30 versus 6? I don't know how that works, but just throwing that out there, you know, just so
I don't
we
know
are.
logistically, if, with the,
You would like to
especially
be
with
here
it
till
being
9
recorded
p.m.?
now, so I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know, that's also
On
not
a
a me
case-by-case
question.
basis.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. Logistically is the question, the big question. Far as now, we're doing live stream. Also, it's also planning with the Public Service Center as well, what they have at before us. So they had a meeting before us that ended right at 5 o'clock, and so we usually have to set the room up accordingly as well. So it's all about logistics. I'm not saying that we can't, but it boils down to logistics.
But I think it will be helpful if I can take stuff out of my head and put it on paper. So at least maybe you could plan, and it might be an encouragement to stay on schedule. So I will commit to putting times on the agenda next time, and I hope I don't rue the day that I said this. But yeah, I know, I understand the concern, and I agree with you. Right. Yep. So I'll put times on, and then that will be an encouragement for all of us to, like, if you're sitting next to somebody, maybe, hey, this is supposed to be over in 2 minutes. So I'll commit to doing that for next time, and that should help. Is there any other new business? Commissioner Gurry and Sherman?
I would just suggest that maybe we rotate being timekeeper at the meetings. So we give 5 or 10 minutes when the time is supposed to be up, and that we also have the ability to extend the time if we all feel it's necessary.
Thank you. Is there any other new business? Okay, hearing no further new business, the next order of business on the agenda, number 11, is acceptance of public comments. And anyone who's still hanging in here with us and wants to make a public comment should first have signed in. Is there a commissioner who would like to keep a 2-minute timer going for us? Commissioner Newman? Okay, thank you. And if you would like to make a public comment, you're welcome to come to the microphone so that the live stream can hear you. Thank you. And if you will tell us your name as you start.
There we go. Evening, my name is Howard Dotson. I was born at Minneapolis General. My formative years were in Camden. I think it would be respectful of the community to move your public comment to the beginning of the meeting. I have concerns about Minneapolis PD. I support Chief O'Hara and Chief Axel Henry and the new sheriff. I call them the Three Amigos. They are reformers. But I'm seeing officers slow walk. I've had 3 different instances where I've asked MPD to help. A guy was walking across Central like Frogger. The officer did not do a welfare check. He just said, stay out of the street. I asked for BCR. They didn't arrive in time. Mother of 7 OD'd in front of McDonald's and came to. When I asked the officers to check an ID so we can do a welfare check on those children, they never checked their ID. They never got out of the squad. I called back dispatch. I asked for BCR. I'm left going back to the Mayo Clinic wondering about the welfare of 7 children. Inspector Adams finally followed up with me and said, we did get BCR there and she's okay. Last night I was assaulted at the 4th Street. I wanted to file a police report for assault and battery. The officer said to me, follow up with the Hennepin County attorney. So I called dispatch back again. The same officers came out to take my police report. So we're down a lot of officers, but this half-assing and passive aggressiveness I see with some of the PD officers, they need to be retrained, they need to be professional, and they need to be thorough. We deserve that. That's going to be part of the trust that we rebuild with the community. But if you know anyone that's good and righteous, we need them to serve MPD. We're short. We are shorthanded. I get it. But everything Chief O'Hara said, I wanted to cheerlead him. He is who we need. Because he's been through a consent decree. I told the New York Times after Garland was here, this man is my hope.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dodson.
Hello. My name is Emma Peterson, Master of Public Policy. I'm also an alumna of the Minneapolis Youth Congress, and I also served on the Police Chief Selection Committee. I want to share a story with you, though, about my time as a Minneapolis Police Explorer. And I first want to thank the folks from, I'm sorry, I forgot your organization's name, but the report on domestic violence. And just about the same time that report came out, first one in 2017, I was the captain of the Minneapolis Police Explorers program. And we had a presentation from one of the officers who led our trainings, who informed a group of aspiring police officers that if a domestic violence victim has a no contact order for somebody and they invite that person over and that person assaults that person or that woman, that you shouldn't arrest them because that person was asking for it. And as soon as that police officer left the room, it was my duty then as a captain, as a young person, a minor at that time, to re-educate all of these young people on the state law, which says that you shall arrest when somebody violates a no contact order, and you shall arrest when you get a report of domestic violence. And so from my experience within the Minneapolis Police Department with that incident, with other incidents, my experience, the Minneapolis Police Department doesn't care about victims of domestic assault, and they don't care about women. I even have, when I made a complaint to the police department about sexual harassment, I had an investigator who's in this room tell me that I just needed to get thicker skin because I will find sexual harassment at any level of law enforcement, local, state, federal. And what my godmother then said to them when she came into the room was that we are not raising women to be the playthings of the Minneapolis Police Department. And so I would just like to bring that to your attention that those same officers are one of the ones that stayed, and one of them at one point was an investigator for the Juvenile Sex Crimes Unit. And another one that I made a complaint about was in the Procedural Justice Unit. So these are your officers that have continued to stay in the Minneapolis Police Department. I also just want to second, again, that public comment be first, because once again, you guys can hear this public comment, you can have discussion on it, and you can make new business because of what you hear from public comment, which is something that happened with me and my family when we came here in 2018. So I would request that you do that, and then I would also request that you guys take the concerns about training a little bit more seriously, because you all need to understand police use of force. You need to understand state laws on domestic violence to be able to look at any of this, to be able to understand what you're doing in your role as a commissioner. So I really urge you to take those concerns seriously, that you need training, just like I needed training as a young person in Police Explorers. And I will bet you all that I know much more from just being an explorer about police use of force. So anyway, thank you all for your time. I know it's late, but thank you.
Thank you. And the name of that, their organization is Global Rights for Women.
my name's Nicole Kesselring, and I don't ever speak. I really just don't, because, but there's a few things here that I have to speak about. I'm the godmother of my goddaughters who went into policing, and they were in policing. One was in for 10 years, 2 departments. This is hard because this has been a fight for years, and I sit and I hear over and over the same story, and I'm looking in the back at some of the same people. I'm looking at the back at some of the same people who told me it was okay, who came after my family and my kids because they wanted to be cops. They're women. And I'm going to tell you something, women in policing, we sit here and talk about domestic violence, but we allow our women, female officers, to be degraded, harassed, and retaliated against. And I see the people lowering your eyes right now because you don't want to see me. I have been fighting this for years. They don't want my kids to talk. What happened to them? Just recently, when my goddaughter was on the committee, she was told, well, you know, white women just want to be police officers so that they can save black babies. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. That was while she was on the Chiefs Committee. We're fighters. You're not getting rid of us because women are great police officers. But the problem is we're not being supported by the community. It's 12% across the entire United States because we allow men, frankly, to run us out due to the lack of accountability and policies. There is no protection for a woman in policing. In fact, if you want to know, there's articles. There was one 8 months ago by NBC News who did a report. 60 lawsuits that they looked at, over $40 million. So if you don't care about women, maybe you care about money. $40 million, okay, in lawsuits. And you know what it came down to? The exact same things my kids went through. And the people that did it got promoted. The men who did it and the woman who did it all got promoted. And my kids were followed. And I've been told, and they've been told, our story isn't true. Well, I've got the documentation. They took us out of the city to a separate lawyer who didn't take notes for 4 hours on each one of us. You have no idea how bad this problem is. You want to make change in this city? We got to start looking at what we're doing to women in our own communities. Native American women's, they use the most use of force on out of anyone. Native American women. But you will sit here and you will hear over and over and over again, and I can see the situation going on because I've been through it, and I am looking right back at the conversations going on behind me, and I've been there. I've been there, and I've been here, and I've been here. This is why I don't speak, because I get too mad. Because I have PTSD. I watched my sister die in front of me. I know exactly what it's like. I know that most people who are police officers end up dying from PTSD. I get it. Doesn't make me anti-cop to stand up here and say that we need to do better as a community, but the problem is we got to start with the truth and saying how great all the officers are when it's mainly men and we have no outlet for women to be able to speak and find an actual safe place to go when they're being harassed, and it is happening. It wasn't just mine. I know. You want to talk about the reason why we can't hire officers? Because women can't stay in a department unless they want to either put up with it and work their way up, or they go through the abuse.
Thank you for your comment. I think your
I
time has
apologize for my anger.
expired.
It's why I don't talk, though. So I don't know if you have daughters, but think about that. Would you put them there?
Thank you. Is there further public comment?
Thank you. My name is Maddie Peterson. Thank you to my godmom and thank you to my sister for speaking up. I'm going to read because I'm just too mad. I was a police explorer at a CSO in MPD for 6 years and 10 years total on a different department. I'm also pro certified and I'm getting my bachelor's degree at the U of M. In my opinion, you guys do not live in a reality if you are talking calmly and giving grace to police officers here in the city after what you guys have found in these reports. I'm speaking to you women. These officers who have stayed are some of the ones who have sexually harassed my sister and I, physically threatened me, and basically stolen my career in policing. And you have CSOs who are now police officers who have stolen money from our city because they weren't working, but they put it on their time card. And they were CSOs at the time, but now they're police officers. I don't know if they got disciplined. I don't know. But you still got them here in the city. And then you guys are living, in my opinion, in a fantasy if you think that our culture in MPD has changed because of the new chief. It's not your individual officers, it's your culture who is the problem. And how you are changing the culture needs to be addressed. And I'll give you an example. At 15, my sister went on a ride-along with 2 officers during the zombie pub crawl weekend. While responding to a sexual assault call, the female officer told my sister that most rape victims are making it up and none of these reports go anywhere. My sister then had to sit in the back of the squad car with this woman who was crying, knowing that these officers didn't give a shit. Did you also know that in 2017, an ex-wife of an MPD spoke out about her domestic experience, about the officer, her husband, who was trying to kill her, who was convicted once and who was arrested twice after trying to strangle her, which is a felony. But he was still on the department. And did you know that there have been 500 cases since 1995 of police officers who have been convicted for domestic violence, and only 4 of those officers have had their license revoked. Now, this was in 2017, I don't know, but this is exactly around the time your guys' report came out.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. Your time has expired.
So my question is, how are you guys helping victims of police officers? Because police officers are also victimizing our community as well as their wives. So please realize that our officers have not shown that they care about our community. So please do not gaslight us.
Thank you.
Have you ever filed a complaint against an officer, or have you ever had a domestic violence incident yourself? Because I have had both of those, which is why, ma'am, I'm almost done.
Okay.
Which is why I wanted to become a police officer. I have, and it's the most frustrating thing. So I demand that you start listening to the public. Ma'am, excuse me, you're like writing. You don't even care. Honestly, so
I'm going to
I'm
have to ask
stop.
you to end your comments. Thank you.
Please don't give me an attitude.
Thank you for your comment, but I am going to have you. Your time has expired. Thank you. Thank you. Is there additional? Okay.
My name's Chuck Turchik. After Emma's and Nicole's and Maddie's stirring comments, this is going to seem quite bureaucratic, but there's no way to communicate with you, and some of these are kind of timely issues, so I'm going to raise these bureaucratic issues, and I apologize to the three previous speakers if this is going to be somewhat staid. S-T-A-I-D, I know what I meant by that. First, I do have a recommendation for one of your committees. You haven't had any discussion about what your relationship should be to the MDHR settlement agreement and to the pending consent decree. Maybe you want to have some collective input into the consent decree. Maybe you want to have some suggestions on implementation down the road. Maybe you want to communicate to the implementation committee within the Minneapolis Police Department. Maybe you want to communicate to the monitor as a collective group. Maybe you want to communicate to the city attorney's office. So I think there should be an ad hoc committee to help determine or make suggestions what the relationship of the entire commission should be regarding the consent decree and the settlement agreement, which we already have the provisions for. My second comment is that when we heard about from the Global Rights for Women report, they referred to an earlier report that came out of the PCOC, the Police Conduct Oversight Commission. And that report actually came out in January of 2018. The study was done in 2017. And it came about because one of the commissioners saw 3 case summaries that are referred to in the PCOC report, which is available online on the OPCR website. She saw 3 case summaries that they had gotten that talked about domestic violence. Now you no longer will be getting those case summaries. You will only hear the cases that go to a full hearing. But if you look at the ordinance, I encourage you to look at the ordinance section 172.30C, the second sentence. Councilmember Chugtai added that amendment, which requires, it says that you shall receive anonymized summaries of every complaint that's filed, every investigation. So you would have data on every complaint that is filed in an anonymized form, just as the PCOC was getting 3 of those summaries a month. But now you will be getting all of them. Because frequently, some of the most important cases do not reach the full investigation stage. I'm out of time.
Yep.
I'll wait till next month to
But I will
to do
say
the other
that
2
I
points.
listed my email address on the chair report, so there is a way for you to contact the commission. You can email me.
On the commission's own website, there is not even a contact person listed. It might be helpful to add that.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. But there is an email. If you look for the chair report, I've listed my email address on there. Is there any? Commissioner Gary and Sherman.
We just reviewed our norms tonight, the ones that we passed at the last meeting. I'm giving you notice that I intend to make an amendment to these norms that instead of saying respect opinion of other commissioners, it says respect opinion of other commissioners, guests, speakers, and those in public comment. We should never have somebody crying after they deliver a public comment. They should not feel that they were disrespected here. And Chief O'Hara brought up a great point that officers sometimes do things that have become regular and kind of rote. And he comes in as an outsider and can say, this is not what we want. That is not what any of us want. We need to make sure that our eyes are on the speaker, and we're not snickering, we're not rolling our eyes. I feel personally responsible for 3 people feeling like they were not respected. I hope you all do too. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me just say, I did not have my eyes on speakers because I wrote notes. So if that offended one of our speakers, then I apologize, but I don't think anyone in here is behaving in a spirit of disrespectfulness. And we're still on public comment, so Vice Chair Reeves, did you? Turn.
Say, can you hear me? I just want to say absolutely want to make sure that we respect all the speakers, but I also want that reciprocated. I think the point of public comment is that we take what you're saying and do something with it. So we have to be able to write things down. We have to be able to process how we process. And one thing as an African-American woman, it's hard when people try to police our face. So I would ask that people not do that out of respect. I don't want to do it to any person in the public, and I don't want it done to me because it's oftentimes done to me. And so just be mindful of, we want you to hear what you're saying. I want to be able to write notes without someone thinking I'm not paying attention, because I like to write things down so I don't miss things. So please don't take people writing things down as not listening to you, because sometimes we process that way. So I just want to make sure that we kind of put that comment out there, and I respect everyone. And I would hope that all the commissioners, they did as well, but we process information because you want us to do something with what you're saying. So we have to write it down. Thank you.
I just say that I'm really sorry. I was in the heat of the moment. I know you guys are paying attention. You know, I do have a past history with this. I have been going to the OPCR for years before you guys.
Thank you. I appreciate your comment, Vice Chair Reeves, and Ms. Peterson, yes, and yours as well. And I don't believe that there's anyone else signed up for public comment. Okay. Okay.
I would like to say that we are commissioners. We have history as well with police, with regular civilians. We have education and training purposes that may be needed for advancement in this role. We have, you know, more than education, experience as well. So please don't take us lightly because we're sitting here at this table. You don't know, just like we don't know your story either. Nobody was disrespecting, nobody was snickering. And at the end of the day, we're all here with one common goal, that needs to be the focus. People are emotional, and it's come, like you said, it's reciprocated both ways. So please don't down talk us either at this position in this role. And in the same spec, I don't want other commissioners to down talk us as well.
Thank you. I don't believe that there is any further community members wishing to make a comment, but I do want to thank everyone for their presence today and for their thoughtful comments. We received your comments, and we appreciate them. I also want to thank our guests, who are the real MVPs from Global Rights for Women. I think I sent them a note. You are welcome to leave after you present, but they're still here. So thank you. We appreciate your presence and your attendance tonight. And the final item on our agenda is adjournment. Our next regular meeting will be Monday, September 11th at 6 p.m. in this location. Thank you to each commissioner present tonight, our guests, again, OPCR staff for your assistance tonight. And
Do you need a motion for that?
Nope.
Okay,
We
perfect.
are adjourned.
Thank you to staff for these great name tags.